Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're going to be looking at PDO, or PHP Data Objects, and I'm doing this tutorial for a few reasons. One, because we've been very JavaScript heavy lately, and another is because I've had a bunch of requests to do something with PDO, especially from those of you that have been following the PHP Front to Back series. And I apologize that that series kind of ended so abruptly, or went on hiatus, I should say. It's not actually ended. It just wasn't getting the views, so you can think of this video as kind of a continuation of that series if you want. Now, PDO, it can be a very complicated topic. There's a lot to it, so we'll be covering mostly the basics in this crash course. So we're going to look at some slides, and then we're going to jump into some code. Alright, so before we get started, I just want to mention some of my social media links. So if you guys want to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, we also have a Discord chat server at discord.gg/traversymedia. I've been extremely busy lately with courses and stuff, so I haven't been on too much, but there's a bunch of people that are on there that are willing to help if you have any issues or if you just want to talk about programming in general. Alright, so what is PDO? It stands for PHP Data Objects, and it's a PHP extension which is a lean and consistent way to access a database. Okay, it can be used in place of mysqli, which is MySQL improved, and that's one of the main ways to connect to and work with a MySQL database. Unlike MySQLi, PDO works with multiple database systems, so you can use it with MySQL or Postgres or Firebird or Microsoft SQL. There's a bunch of different databases you can use, and I'll show you some of those in a little bit. So PDO provides a data access layer, which means that no matter what database you're using, no matter what type of system, you use the same functions to execute queries and fetch data. PDO doesn't provide a database abstraction. It doesn't rewrite SQL like full-blown abstraction layers like something like PeerDB. It's an actual data access layer. Okay, it's also completely object-oriented with methods and properties. PDO ships with PHP version 5.1 and later. It will not run on PHP 4 because it needs the object-oriented features of PHP 5. Alright, so what are some benefits of PDO over something like MySQLi? As I said, it works with multiple databases. It does not support syntax that's just specific to a certain database. In some cases, you can just switch out the connection string to change the database you're working with. So for instance, to go from MySQL to Postgres. Now, many SQL databases do have different styles and flavors of SQL, so you do have to take that into account as well. Alright, now security is one of the biggest benefits of PDO. It uses prepared statements, which can help prevent your database from SQL injections. Okay, when we get into the code, I'm going to show you how to write prepared statements. An SQL injection, in simple terms, is where someone tries to insert SQL statements and instructions through some kind of user input, like a form on your website. So stuff that could completely destroy your database. If you have a poorly designed system, this is very easy to do. Alright, so a prepared statement is a precompiled SQL statement that separates the instruction of the instruction of the SQL statement from the data. With prepared statements, the data that comes in from a user is treated as just data. There's no way that it can be interpreted as an SQL instruction, which can happen when data is passed into your SQL. Alright, so I should also mention that MySQLi does include prepared statements. PDO just does it better with named parameters and so on, and I'll get into that later. So in addition to PDO being very secure, it's also very usable. It has a ton of helper functions that can automate routine operations, and I'll show you some of the different options for fetching data, also exceptions and so on. It's reusable in a sense that it has a unified API to access multiple databases. It also has excellent error handling options and functionality using exceptions. There's basically 3 different ways to handle errors, and that's silent, warning, and exception. So with PDO, you have 3 main classes. You have the PDO class. This basically represents a connection between PHP and the database. This is where we plug in the DSN, which I'll talk about later. The PDO statement class represents a prepared statement, and after it's executed, the associated result from that statement. And then the PDO exception class represents errors raised by PDO, and there's many different options and ways to handle exceptions. So here are some of the databases that can be used with PDO: MySQL, which is what we'll be using, Postgres, Microsoft SQL, Oracle, and many others, many of which I've never even touched. Alright guys, so I don't want to bore you with any more slides, so let's jump in and let's start to work with PDO. Alright guys, so if you want to use PDO, obviously you're going to need PHP installed. When I do PHP development, I use something called XAMPP or XAMPP, however you want to pronounce it. And it basically gives you a complete local environment with an Apache server, PHP, MySQL, a tool called PHP It gives you a whole bunch of stuff right on your local machine. So I would definitely suggest that for development, and it's cross-platform. It's available on Windows, Mac, or Linux, and that's available at apachefriends.org. But of course, you can use anything else. If you have a native LAMP stack on a Linux server or something, you can use that. You can use WAMP, which is another option, which I think is just for Windows. Let me just check that real quick. So you have WAMP, wampserver.com. Which is kind of the same thing, gives you an Apache server, PHP. Then you have MAMP, which is used to be for just Mac, but I believe you can get it for Windows now. Yeah, I think you can get it for, yeah, you can download for Windows too. But I would suggest XAMPP or XAMPP. So if you have one of those installed, or you just have a regular LAMP stack, you want to first just check your php.ini file. If you're using XAMPP, it's going to be in your XAMPP folder, which is going to be in your C drive by default, and then go to PHP, and then your php.ini file, which is right here. I'm just going to open that with Sublime, and then let's just do a quick search here for PDO. And then there's an extension for each database. Okay, so you'll see right here is the PDO MySQL extension. And you want to make sure that this is uncommented. You want to make sure there's no semicolon in front of it. Okay, you'll see that I also use it with Postgres, so I don't have a semicolon there either. You can use it with SQLite, and then there's other databases as well that aren't even listed here. But make sure that that MySQL one does not have a semicolon. If it does, just remove it, save the file, and then just restart your server. Okay, and if you're using XAMPP to restart, just go to your panel, which is right here, and just stop and start Apache. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, if you're using XAMPP, you'll have an htdocs folder. That's your local host. And whatever you're using, just go to wherever your server folder is. And I've created a folder called PDO example, and then I just have a single index.php file in here. And that's what's opened over here in VS Code. Okay, so if I go to localhost / PDO example, that's what's getting loaded. It's just a blank file. All right, I'm going to make this smaller because we're not actually building an application or anything. We're just using the browser for output. All right, so now what we need to do is create a database. Actually, I'm going to make this bigger again because we're going to use PHP to create a database. Now, if you want to use your MySQL shell or some other program, you can do that as well, but we're going to just really quickly create a very, very simple database. So we'll say create database. I'll just call this, let's call it PDO posts. And we're going to create one table called post or posts. I don't know exactly how many fields. Let's say 6 and go. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create an ID, which is going to be an integer. It's going to be auto increment, so we want to check that. And it's going to be our primary key. So you want to make sure that that says primary. Then we're going to have a title, which is going to be a varchar, a variable character. That's going to be, let's say, 255 max length. Next one will be the body. That'll be text. Okay, so text actually doesn't need a length. And then we'll have an author. So for author, that'll be varchar. We'll say 255. And then we'll have an is published. And we'll set that to Boolean, which is right here. And let's set a default for that. So under this default, we're going to say as defined, and we're going to say true. Okay, and then the last one here, let's just say, I don't know, we'll say create or created at, and we're going to set this to date time. We really don't need this one, but I'll just put it in anyway. So we'll say date time, and under default, let's say current timestamp. So that'll get inserted by default. All right, and that's it. Let's go ahead and save. And now we have our database and we have our post table. So that's what we're going to be working with in this crash course. All right, so back to our file over here. We have an index.php file inside of PDO example. So let's create a PHP tag. And then first thing we want to do is just create our variables for our database. So we're going to have our host, which is going to be, of course, our local host. We're going to have a user. All right, now I'm using my root user and password. Now, if you want to manage your database users, you can actually do that from phpMyAdmin. If you go to privileges, you'll see I'm using my root user right here, and I'm going to put the password in. If you want to change the password, you can go right here and you can change it. All right, but we're going to go ahead and just put that in, which is just 1 through 6. And then we want the DB name, and the DB name is PDO posts, okay, or whatever you put. So right here, PDO posts. All right, so those are our variables. Now what we need to do is we need to set the DSN. So DSN is data source name, which is basically a string that has the associated data structure to describe a connection to a data source. So this is where we include the whatever driver, whatever database we want to use. In our case, we're using MySQL. We want to also include the host and the database name and stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and format this. So let's create a variable here called DSN, and we're going to set this to a string. And in here, we're going to pass in the driver we want, which is MySQL. Then we want to put a colon and then the host equals, and then remember we have our variables up here, so we want to use those. So we're going to concatenate in here. I'm going to go ahead and put a dot and then say host. So this is just bringing in this local host into our string here, for bringing in the variable. All right, then we want to concatenate again and open up a string, and we want to put a semicolon. Okay, after the host you should have a semicolon, and then we want to specify DB name equals, and then again after this single quote we're going to concatenate the variable DB name. All right, so that's our DSN. Now what we want to do is create a PDO instance. And for that, we'll just create a variable. I'm going to call it PDO. Of course, you can call it whatever you want. A lot of people call it connection. And then I'm going to say new PDO. Oops. And then in here, we want to pass in that DSN. We also want to pass in the user, and we want to pass in the password. Okay, so that creates our instance to work with. Now, as far as making queries, there's basically two ways that we can do this. We can use the query method, which is fine if you're not using any kind of variables or any kind of user input. But if you are, which in a lot of cases you're going to be if you're using, you know, an application with forms and stuff, then you're going to want to use prepared statements, okay? But before we get into prepared statements, let's talk a little bit about PDO query, about the query method. All right, so we'll say PDO query, and we're going to create a variable called stmt for statement, and then we're going to take that PDO instance and we're going to call the query method, or that PDO object. And here we're just going to put a simple query. We'll say select all from posts. Okay, we have a post table. We just want to select all from it. And then this will actually get our results. Now, what we want to do is we want to loop through the results and then output them onto the screen. So we're going to create a while loop here. All right, and we're going to say while row equals, and then the statement stmt, and then we want to just call a method called fetch. All right, so we want to go like that. Now inside this fetch method, we need to basically tell it how we want this formatted. So let me just do a quick search here. We'll say PDO fetch options. Okay, now you can fetch as an associative array, which is what I'm going to do right now. Returns an array indexed by column name as returned in your result set. You can do fetch object. Okay, so you can fetch an object which uses this syntax. Where is it? With the little arrow here. You can fetch a regular array. You can fetch key value pairs. There's all different stuff you can do, but what we're going to be working with is associative arrays and objects, which is the most common. So in here, we're going to pass in right here, PDO fetch assoc. All right, and then in here, we can do what we want with the data. So I'm just going to go and echo, and we're going to say row. And remember, it's an associative array, so we need to format it like this with our brackets. And then we can grab whatever fields we want. If we look at our database, let's see, let's go to posts. If we look at the structure, we have a title, body, author. So I'm going to get the title. All right, so we'll say echo row title. And then I'm just going to also concatenate a line break. All right, so we'll just go like that. Now, if I save and reload, we're not going to see anything because we don't actually have anything in the database. So what we'll do is go back to phpMyAdmin or to your MySQL shell or however you want to do it and insert some data. All right, so it's very easy with phpMyAdmin. We'll just go to insert. We'll say post 1. This is post 1, and author, I'll just say Brad, is published 1, and then I'll leave the current timestamp. For this one, I'll say post 2. Yeah, this is post 2. Author, we'll say John. We'll say go. All right, so now we have 2 entries in our database. You can see here. So now let's go back to our web page and reload, and we get post 1 and post 2. So we're able to fetch this data. Now let me give you an example of using an object, okay? Formatting this as an object. So I'm going to copy this while statement and then just go ahead and comment it out. And then we're going to pass in here fetch obj, obj. And then instead of using this format, you'll see what happens if I save and I try to reload. It'll say cannot use of type std class as array. Whenever you see this, it basically means that you're trying to take an object and use the syntax of an array. So we're going to go ahead and say row and then use this little arrow and then title. All right, and then we'll save and reload, and then we get our data. Now, if you don't want to have to always specify it like this, you'll see if I go ahead and take that out and reload, it's saying trying to get property of non-object. So if you want to set a default of, let's say, an object every time you fetch data, what you can do is you can go and you can add an attribute. So up here, we're going to say PDO, and we're going to say set attribute, and we're going to pass in here PDO :attr underscore default underscore fetch underscore mode, and then we're going to put a comma and we're going to say PDO _ fetch underscore obj, sorry. All right, and that'll set it to the default of an object. So now if I save, and even though I have nothing inside of here and we reload, it's going to work. Now if you want to override that, that's fine. So if I were to go ahead and uncomment this, and even though we have it set to an object, we're overriding it right here as an associative array. So if I save and reload, that's still going to work. Okay, so that's about as far as I want to go with just the PDO query. Now we're going to talk a little bit about prepared statements. So let's go ahead and just comment all this stuff out. And I'm going to leave everything I do here for you guys. This stuff should stay, okay? All this stuff should stay. So let's say prepared statements. All right, so basically with prepared statements, we have 2 main methods, and that's prepare and execute. Okay, Now, first thing I'm going to do is show you an unsafe way to do it. Okay, so you guys have probably seen this a lot. So we'll have an SQL variable, and it'll say like select all from posts where author equals, and then you have the, and this is worse if it's an insert, obviously, but you'll have like the variable right in here. Whoops, author. Okay, and then this variable will come from a form, like a submit form or something, or a search form. And this can give them the opportunity to actually insert SQL instructions right into your query. So that's what prepared statements are good for. It separates the instruction from the actual data. Okay, so there's no way to kind of mix them. So let's go ahead and comment that out, and let's go ahead and fetch some posts just like we did above, but with prepared statements. So let's say fetch multiple posts, and I'm going to show you guys how to fetch single posts. I'm going to show you how to insert, how to update, delete, all that stuff, how to search with like, and we'll do some other stuff as well. So to fetch multiple posts, now when you're using prepared statements, there's basically two ways to do it. You can use positional parameters and you can use named parameters. So positional parameters are actually supported by mysqli. If you've ever done prepared statements with mysqli, then you've probably used those. So let me first show you those. So we'll say positional params. So we want to create our statement. So we'll say SQL equals, and let's do select all from posts where author equals. Now, instead of just putting in, you know, my variable like we did up there, we're going to put in a placeholder, and that's going to be a question mark. This is a positional parameter, okay, when we use the question mark. And then we're going to go on to the next line, and we're going to create our statement. So we'll say stmt, and we're going to set that to PDO. So we're taking our PDO instance, and we're going to call a method called prepare. Okay, and then we're going to just put in our SQL. So that's going to prepare our statement. Now we need to execute it. So we're going to say stmt, and we're going to call execute. Okay, and then inside execute, we need to put an array. And we're going to pass in whatever the variable is. Now let's say our user input, and we're getting an author, and we'll set that to Brad. Actually, let's put in one more post in phpMyAdmin. We'll say post 3. And we'll say author Brad. We'll put another one as well. Post 4. And this one we'll set is published to 0. And go. Okay, so now we have quite a few posts. And we're going to go ahead and inside this execute, we're going to put this variable of author. Okay. So this is the placeholder here, and then we're filling this placeholder with this. Now it's important to know with positional parameters, the order is sensitive. Okay, so if you say where author equals this and something else equals that, the first variable should be first in this array, and then the next variable. Okay, so it should be in the same order. Hopefully that makes sense. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called posts. We're going to set it to stmt, and then since we're fetching more than one, we're going to call fetch all. Okay. Now inside this fetch all, we can put in our fetch obj or fetch assoc, just like we did up here. But I'm just going to leave it blank since we set the default of object. Close that out. Okay, so now what we can do is we can loop through these posts. Actually, let me first we'll do a var dump. Okay, so var dump will just basically show us what's in this post object or this post variable. Okay, and you can see that it has all of our posts in it. It has, whenever you see this std class, it relates to an object. So what we can do here is we can loop through with a for each. All right, so we'll say for each posts as, and I'm just going to say posts. You can use whatever you want, and we'll just echo out post title. All right, and then we'll just concatenate a line break. All right, so we'll save that and reload, and there we go. We get all of our posts that have the author Brad. Notice that post 2 is not there. Okay, now I want to show you how to do the same thing using named parameters. So what I'm going to do is, actually I'll copy this because it's very similar, and then I'm going to comment that out, and then here we're going to say named params. So with named parameters, instead of using the question mark, we're going to use colon and then a named parameter. So we'll say author. And then down here, instead of just having a regular array, we're going to have an associative array. So it'll be author, whatever the named parameter, and then we'll point to the variable, which is up here, Brad. Okay, we can do the same thing. So we'll save, we'll reload, and there we go. If we change the author to John and save and reload, we get just post 2 because that's John's post. Now let's say you wanted to use more than one variable in the where clause. So let's say we wanted to get all the published posts too. So what I'll do is put a variable for is published, and we'll set that to true. And then down here, if we wanted to add more, what we would do, we can make this much smaller. We can also get rid of this. All right, so what we would do, we now have is published equals true, so we'll just go ahead and we'll put in double ampersand, and we'll say where is published is equal to colon is published. Whoop. All right, and then down here we need to add it to our named parameters. So we'll say quotes is published equals is published. All right, so let's go ahead and save. Let's change this back to, if we reload, we're going to still get post 2 because that's John's only post and it is published, but let's change this to Brad. And just pretend that this is coming from a web page, from a form or something. So we'll save and reload, and we get post 1 and post 3. Now we didn't get post, what was it? I think 4. Let's see. We didn't get 4 because is published is set to 0. Okay, so we have multiple conditions in our where clause. All right, so now let's go ahead and fetch a single post. So what I'll do is just comment this stuff out. By the way, to do the commenting like that, I'm just highlighting and then doing Control/. So we'll go down here and we'll say fetch single post, and it's not going to be very different than what we were doing here. So what I'll do is just copy that. Okay, we'll uncomment this, and we're going to say select all from posts where, and let's get rid of this second one. We'll say where ID is equal to colon ID, and again, you can use positional parameters if you want. Now up here I'm going to add another variable of ID, and we're going to set that to 1. Okay, and then down here we're going to do our statement prepare. That's going to be the same, and then with the execute we're just going to say ID equals the variable of ID, and we'll get rid of this second one. And then instead of fetch all, we're going to do just fetch because we're just getting one record. All right, and then we can simply echo out or do whatever we want with post and then whatever field we want. Let's get the body this time. All right, so we'll save that and we'll reload. Undefined variable post, that's because this should be post. Reload, and we get this is post 1. Okay, and you can put HTML in here if you want. For instance, if you wanted to end this and then, you know, put an H1 and take this. Oh, I need to do that. And this could be the title. So post 1, and then if you wanted to put a paragraph and then take post body. All right, and you could do the same thing up here as well, but that's not, I mean, that's not very good structure. You should separate your logic from your output. It's even better to use like a template engine or something like that, but just to let you know, you can do that. All right, so I'm just gonna go back to this. All right, so that's selecting one item. Now I'm gonna show you how to get the row count if you ever want to count the rows of a table. We'll say get row count. All right, so get row count, and we're going to create our statement, and we'll set that to our PDO and prepare. Let's say select all from posts, and we'll say where author equals author. Okay, then we just want to do our execute. Actually, let's use a positional parameter. So we'll just put in our exclamation, and then we can simply say statement execute, and we could just put in an array with the author. Okay, and that author variable is still coming from up here. And then all we have to do is create a variable. We'll call it post count, and we'll set it to statement row count, like that. All right, and then we'll echo post count and reload, and we get 3. Okay, if we were to change the author to John and reload, we'll get 1. So that's how we can get a row count. Very easy. Now let's get into inserting data. Okay, so to insert data, let's go ahead and create some variables. We'll say that this stuff is coming from a form. So the title, we'll say, what do we have, 4 in there? Let's say post 5. And let's say the body, this is post 5, and then we'll put an author. And for author, we'll say, I don't know, Kevin. Okay, so let's say that's coming in from a form. So we're going to want to use prepared statements to insert this. So let's first create our SQL. Again, you can use named or positional parameters. We're going to use named, so we're going to say insert into posts. And then we want to put the values, which is going to be title, body, author. And then we want to say values, and that's going to be colon, title, colon, body, colon, author. All right, we'll put a semicolon there, and then we're going to do our prepare. So we'll say stmt equals PDO prepare. And we want to pass in here the SQL. And of course, you could just put this whole string inside here. I just like to put the string inside SQL and then put the SQL in there. So then we need to execute it. So we'll say stmt execute. So you'll see it's not much different than doing a select. So inside the execute, we need to put our associative array. So we're going to say title to the variable title. body to body, and author to the variable of author. All right, so that's our execute, and then let's just say echo post added and save. So let's go ahead and let's go back to our PDO example and reload, and we get post added. Let's look in our database. We'll reload, and there it is, post 5 by Kevin. All right, so now let's do an update. So I'm going to just go ahead and comment this out, and let's see. Actually, you know what I'll do is copy that and then comment it out. And we'll say update data, paste that in. Now here I only want to specify two things. One is what I want to update. So let's say we want to update an ID, or not update an ID, but the ID of post 1. Okay, so we want to update the post with the ID of 1, and we'll change the body to this is the updated post. All right, we'll go ahead and get rid of that. And then we'll change this query up here. I'm just going to replace this whole thing. So instead of an insert, we're going to say update posts, and then set, let's set the body equal to :body where ID is equal to :ID. Okay, then we're going to do our prepare, and then inside the execute, we're going to need the body, and we're going to need to put in the ID. Okay, and then we'll say post updated. Now I'm not formatting this as an actual application, and you guys probably figured that out a while ago. Maybe later on down the line we can build an application with PDO, but I'm just going over just PDO, just the basics. There's a lot to it. I may make another video with more advanced stuff, but I just want beginners to really understand how this works. So let's go ahead and save that, and then we'll go back and reload. We get post updated. If we go to our database and reload, you can see post 1 now has this is the updated post. Okay, so that's update. Now let's do delete. So let's see, I'm just going to copy this and then comment it out. And then we'll do delete data. So for delete, I'm just going to have the ID that I want to delete. Let's say we want to do, let's do post 3. So we'll say ID equals 3, and then we're going to basically we can say delete from posts where ID equals ID, and then down here all we need is the ID, and then we'll say post deleted. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll reload, post deleted. Let's check our database, and now there's no more post 3. All right, so that's how we can delete data. So next thing I want to show you is how we can search data using the like operator. So for this, let's see, what do I want to do? I'll just type it in. So let's create a variable called search. And let's say that we want to search for the word post. So how the like operator works is we're going to put in a %. We're going to say it starts with post and ends. So basically this is going to look for the whole word of post. All right. And then we're going to create our statement. So let's put in our SQL actually first. So we'll say SQL equals, and we're going to say select all from posts where, and let's search the title. So we'll say where title like, and let's use positional parameters. So we'll put a question mark. Okay, you can just as well use named parameters. And then we need to do our prepare. We'll just grab this. Okay, so there's our prepare. Now we want to execute, so we'll say stmt execute. And then we're going to pass in here an array. Since we're using positional parameters, we're just gonna put search. Okay, and then we'll say posts equals statement fetch all. And remember, we set the default to an object, so if you want to pass in a different type, you can, but by default it'll be an object, so we can just for each. So we'll say for each posts as post, and then we'll say echo post title, and we'll just concatenate a line break. Alright, so let's go ahead and reload. We get post 1, post 2. Now all of these have the word post in it, so let's change this to, let's say, 5 and save. Reload, and we get post 5. Alright, so let's say, so we get post 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's put in just an F and save. And reload, and we get post 4 and 5. So this is how searching works. So if you wanted to have a search form to make a post request to your PHP file, and you wanted to use PDO to use the like operator, you could return your search results. All right, so I think we're just about there. Oh, one thing I did want to mention is with limit. If you want to limit your posts, so what I'm going to do is just go up here and use our first example, which is this. Let's see, why is my mouse not working? So we're going to uncomment this. We're going to select all the posts, all the published posts from an author, and then we're going to loop through them. And let's change the author to Brad. Okay, we'll reload. Oh wow, we only have one that's published from Brad. Alright, so let's change this one to 1 then. Alright, so now we should have 2 that are published from Brad. And let's say we want to limit it to 1. So if I were to use, actually, you know what, let's use the positional parameters right here. So we'll say where author equals that and is published equals question mark. Now, like I said, this has to be in order. So since author and then is published, you want to keep that order here. Okay, so let's save that. Reload, we should get the same thing. Now, if we want to limit, like we could say limit 1, and if we wanted, not to use a variable for limit, that's fine. But let's say we wanted that to come from some kind of user input, like a Dropbox or something, a select list. We'll say limit equals 1, and then we'll go ahead and change this to a question mark, and then we'll put down here limit and save, reload, and it's going to not work. So the reason for this is because of emulation. Okay, it's put in something called emulation mode, which is on by default, and it basically has a PDO substitute placeholder with actual data instead of sending it separately. So when it does this, it's actually doing limit 1, 1 like that. So to fix this, what we can do is we can disable the emulation mode. So we'll go up to the top here, and we're going to add another attribute. I'll just copy this. And we're going to set the, let's see, right here. So it's going to be attribute default, or not default, just attribute emulate underscore prepares. And we're just going to set that to the value of false. Alright, so we'll save that, reload, and now the limit works. Okay, so now we can use prepared statements in it for our limits, or placeholders for our limits. Alright guys, so I think that is going to be it for this video. Like I said, I may make a more advanced video later on, and I may continue on with the PHP front to back, I'm not sure. If you guys are interested in me continuing that series, let me know in the comments. and you know, if I get enough requests, then we'll continue with that. All right, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Hey guys, I've just created a new Discord server that's open to the public. The goal is to have a place where people can go to help each other out for programming issues, as well as just a place to discuss new ideas and get feedback. I also check in daily. There's a channel to request videos on YouTube and much more. So if you want to check it out, just go to discord.gg/traversymedia.